Good morning, welcome back. Welcome for those of you who are just joining us this late morning. We're excited that you are here again. We're going to get started with our last panel of the conference, Youth-Nex, Social Justice, Political and Civic Engagement. And again, my name is Valerie Adams-Bass. I am the co-chair of this wonderful conference. And I want to just share with you a little bit about each of our panelists this morning. We're going to go a little bit back to the standard format, and then we'll have Q&A as we always do. A quick reminder, for those of you who have these, for those of us who don't have a good memory, we've given you name tags, but we like them back, and then the memory is all on you. So before you leave today, if you would drop off your name tags, you can keep your actual printout, but we need the lavaliers. So if you would return them to Crystal and Courtney at the registration table once your time with us has ended, we'd appreciate it. Okay? Thank you so much. So I want to start out with Dr. Lisa Diaz. Lisa Diaz is Director of 4-H Youth Development at the University of Illinois Extension. Since 1902, 4-H has provided high-quality youth development experiences through a network of more than 100 public universities and colleges across the nation and in more than 50 countries around the world. 4-H serves youth 5 to 18 and is guided by a core belief in youth as drivers of change. 4-H reaches youth in every corner of America, from urban neighborhoods to suburban schoolyards to rural farming communities. The 4-H network of 500,000 volunteers and 3,500 4-H professionals provides caring and supportive mentoring to all 6 million 4-Hers, helping them to grow into true leaders for today and for life. So we welcome Lisa to our panel. And Jack Drummond is Director of the Philadelphia Mayor's Office of Black Male Engagement. He is a leader, an administrator, an advisor, an adjunct professor at Lincoln University, and a fabulous musician. He left that off. As director for the Mayor's Office of Black Male Engagement, he is tasked to help create an equitable Philadelphia for men and boys of color by eliminating disparities and creating opportunities. Drummond also has 15 years of mental health experience as an administrator and direct service worker for youth and families. He has a triple BS degree in psychology, education, and music, and a master's of education degree in education from Lincoln University. As the director of the Mayor's Office of Black Male Engagement, Jack initiated the My Brother's Keeper Community Conversations Initiative, which is a monthly discussion in communities that aims to discuss and provide resources for community members who support men and boys of color in America. He also helped to create the Philadelphia Men and Boys in Color Collaborative, a citywide rites of passage initiative for community leaders, providing workshops, trainings, and forums that will bring men of color in the city of Philadelphia into deeper engagements and empowering experiences. Aidyn Mills, local to us here, Aidyn designs opportunities for social change by connecting the dots between people and institutions. She manages 2 programs for high school youth and the next generation with the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. Again, she's got the money to promote civic engagement. Mills is a cultural anthropologist who also enjoys the challenges and opportunities for collaboration and creativity with her 7-year-old daughter. And last but not least, we have Ken Thornton, who is replacing Jose on our panel. If you're saying, where's Jose? His name is Ken. This is Ken, our youth on this panel, and Ken is here with us today. He's a junior at Murray High School. He works as a barista at Greenberry's, so if you need good coffee, our coffee isn't good enough, please see Ken. And is beginning an internship with Albemarle County Police Department. Upon graduation, he'd like to attend college and become a police officer. Again, very ambitious young person. So please help me welcome our panelists this morning who are going to share with you their perspectives on what it's like to address and to integrate social justice, civic engagement, political engagement from a systemic approach. We'll start off with Lisa. I want to say Lisa Bouillon, but Lisa Diaz. Thank you. And we have a clicker here, for those of you that know. We have a clicker.
Thank you, Valerie, and good morning, everyone. I know this is a tough slot right before everybody's going to go home, and it's been, I don't know about anyone else, but I've kind of been on this emotional roller coaster of just elated and overwhelmed by the important work that's to get done and how far we've come and how far there is still to go. So it's really been a privilege to listen to all the speakers and to get to meet so many of you. So my background is in working with community grassroots organizations. Before I moved back to Illinois, I was in Philadelphia and worked with a little row home startup youth organization in Camden for many years. And then I went back to University of Illinois, and I'm speaking to you from a practitioner's perspective today. I'm representing 4-H. And as Valerie shared, 4-H feels like this conglomerate in this setting, and it has a really long history. So I always like to start a little bit. How many people have heard of 4-H before? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand up. How many of you know that 4-H is administered by a network of universities and colleges? Okay, so some of you. And how many of you know that 4-H is in our urban centers as well as our rural communities? Have any experience with 4-H in urban centers? I am amazed. This is good news. Okay, so 4-H has been around over 100 years, and starting in the 1800s, really the start of 4-H is a story about people thinking that change was going to happen with adults when experts gave them new information. And adults were going to listen to those experts and say, great, thank you for that new information. I'm going to completely change my way of life and implement new practices, right? So at the time in the 1800s, the universities were saying, we really have some new research about how to go about the work of crop and animal production. And you're not surprised, the adults kind of poo-pooed it and said, no, thank you, I have my family traditions and we do this just fine. And so the adults said, oh, what are we going to do? The experts said, what are we going to do? So they said, I know, maybe we'll go to the kids of the farmers and we'll try some things with them and kind of see how it goes. Well, that was the beginning of 4-H, because what they figured out was not only that these kids were innovative and creative and eager to try new things, but their crops were producing more than their parents' crops. They were more resilient to infestation than things that they were seeing invade their families' crops. And all of a sudden it became this dinner conversation. Tell us what you're doing. So there's stories about youth voice. There's stories about family engagement and conversations that are rooted in the home and then spread out into the community. And so in the 1800s, it was about agricultural innovation. So I'm just going to give you a little snippet of today. Over 100 years later, the core of 4-H, whatever else you hear about 4-H, is grounded in those beginnings that's about youth voice and a belief in youth as assets to influence and impact their communities and the adults around them. So here's a quick clip.
You're going to need me. You're going to need us. All of us. You're going to need our technical skills, our math, our engineering skills. You're going to need our help with your water, your air, your food. You're going to need our organizational skills, our problem-solving skills. You're going to need our determination, our honesty, our compassion. You're going to need the next generation of leaders to face the challenges the future will bring. And we promise we'll be there when you need us.
So I'm going to kind of go back and forth between Illinois, which is what I represent, and telling you a little bit about the national story, because the theme that Valerie asked me to talk about was really how institutionally there has been systematic support for civic engagement and social change, social justice. So I'm going to... This is something that I think, because part of my goal here too is to say, if you don't know about 4-H, they're in every community, every country, and every state and territory, and they would make great partners. I would love, and I'm going to go home and tell all of my peers in other states to go check out all of these great programs and say, how can we work together to lift up youth in our communities? So to know kind of what that network is, so originally, and all of this comes with funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So Valerie didn't mention, but USDA has money too. And so you might look to them for ways to support your own program, and it doesn't have to be 4-H, and it doesn't have to be maybe how you think about 4-H. But it is a network. Starting in 1862 are the original, what we call land grant institutions. And so here it's Virginia State and Virginia Tech, I think, are the land grant. Nancy's saying yes. And it's a little conflicted for me as First Nations, American Indian. Land grant is just what it means. Someone on the East Coast said, oh, that looks like really good land. I'm going to say I own it, and I'm going to decide who I'm going to give it to. So those are the roots of the land grant system, but we're owning them and using them for good today, and that's what I stay focused on. 1890, another bill was passed, and that gave land grant money to every, what we now call historically black universities and colleges, HBCUs. So they are all also part of the land grant system. And then in 1994, 35 American Indian tribal colleges were also added to that network. So as part of receiving money from the USDA, all of those colleges and universities are required to do extension or outreach, and they're required to do 4-H. So it looks a lot of different ways depending on where you go, but there is this network of people doing that work. So I think this is interesting just to go back to the roots of what the vision of this collaborative was, and to see this quote, to think about extension, and I would say this work that we're about in this room too, wherever we represent in the system, to think about it with, of, by, and for the people. And I think that's an idea that is an important tradition in 4-H. And I'm not going to go through, these are Illinois specifics. I'm going to highlight just a few ways in which I think 4-H, I mean, we have this historical story of where 4-H began, because it wasn't the intention. It didn't start out that way. But recently, civic engagement has been more formalized as a mission mandate. So again, think about that network of who's implementing 4-H. It has become a mission mandate with measurable outcomes that all of those doing 4-H are held accountable to. And I think that's important as we think about the system support for this work. I want to tell you about another program, and I'm not even sure that this was the first year, but there was something called 4-H Club Camp. And this grainy black and white picture, literally delegations of youth from the states and territories traveled to DC in front of the White House and pitched tents. Pitched tents, we didn't have hotels, nice cozy little places for all these like legions of kids to go stay in. And what they were doing was they were coming and talking to the politicians in DC about the work that they were doing, the innovations that they were finding in their own work, the issues that mattered in their community, and advocating and raising awareness about what those were. So fast forward from 1927, 4-H now has this building in Chevy Chase, just outside DC, and it is a conference center, and it's now not called Club Camp, it's called National 4-H Conference. And delegations of youth ages 15 to 19, that was the other thing. I was sitting here, and 4-H starts with, depending on the state, in Illinois, we start with kids who are 5. And I right now have a 9-year-old, and his first year in 4-H, all the kids, they join a club, and they get to select any number of projects that they're interested in. My youngest is interested in robotics and electricity and photography, and now he's doing like makey, computer science kinds of things. But he's in a club next to a family that lives on a farm, and they show pigs. And then there's someone else who's really into child development. They think they want to be a teacher when they grow up. So they're doing all of these things, but they have to give talks and demonstrations to each other. So my 5-year-old has to stand in front of this other group of kids and share something he learned. And the meetings are run by kids. They elect officers. They're completely run by kids. And every year, they're all required to pick things in their community that they want to work on together as a club. And something about, we've had amazing examples of activists in the last 2 days. And part of what I think 4-H has embedded into its system support is that the roots of that start when they're 5. The thinking about my community, what are the issues in my community, and they're surrounded, it's all genders, all ages, that kind of in the family engagement, so the kind of intergenerational, cross-age, cross-experience is also modeling a pathway of activism that, again, can start when they're quite young. Although in Illinois, 16% of our first-year members are teenagers. And that's in part because of the intentional programs we've created that we think resonate with what they care about at that age and are geared toward the kinds of leadership roles that they can take at that time. So this National 4-H Conference, they identify issues, much like we just heard about in the Free Library in Philadelphia. They kind of start with what are the issues that matter to me, and then these delegations of teenagers descend on DC together, and they have working sessions where they're developing briefs, policy briefs on these issues, and then they're preparing to actually go to speak with politicians, in this case including the president. I don't think they did that last year, but they are discussing what they care about, what they've learned, advocating for change, but then they are each held accountable to write an action plan that they're going to take home for a project, so they don't just give it over to the politicians and say, okay, do with that what you want. They are each held accountable to going home and developing a plan for what they can use their agency to do with support in their community. And so there's a theme. We have a 4-H Police Academy that grew out of one of these initiatives that was centered in Rockford, Illinois, and just a number of projects 30 years ago. And I just met the adult. She's older than I am, but she went to this when she was in high school, and she came back with the idea to start a state-level advisory group of 4-Hers to represent the issues that mattered across the diversity in Illinois, and it's still running. We still have that group active, and so now she's a professional at the University of Illinois, and that was her take-home project when she went on this National 4-H conference. And I think I'm close to time, so I'm just going to end on this slide. And I was telling the NDI group that their framework, their theory of change about that combination of agency with an enabling environment is very reflective, I think, of some of the things that we have structurally in place. So this progression from a club, we think in counties because we get funding at the county level too, county, state, national, there is a progression of platforms. I think that's a theme maybe for me to support this work, and my time is up, through using privilege to create platforms to bring up voices, to lift up voices that might not otherwise be heard. And that's something that very systematically happens in 4-H. And I can talk more about those, but my time is out. Thank you very much.
So we want to have Jack share with us some of his experiences
Sure.
with the city of Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Before I begin, can I just see those hands raised again? And I just want to ask permission for a selfie, if that's okay. If you don't want to be in the selfie, then just put your hand over your face. That's okay? Perfect. Give yourselves a round of applause. You've just given me my proof that I was actually here today and speaking before you, so I'm honored. And then I also want to, on the record, accept this honorary doctoral degree that I received from UVA. So I just want you to know that I accept it. So thank you very much. I'm not Dr. Jack already, and I mean, not yet, but in 2018, we're looking at it in EDD, sometimes shortly. So, we're little ahead, and we're going to speak that into existence. Thank you so much. Ashe. Okay. So I do have a small presentation, but I'm not, looking to read from the presentation and that sort of thing. I just kind of want to make this as organic as possible. See, you took it, and now it's taken away. And you see how the system works. No, so thank you for the correction. That's what we do here. Getting it back? Thank you. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right into it. My name is Jack Drummond. The exclamation, thank you. These visuals are much better than my presentation would have been anyway, my PowerPoint. So, good morning. It's great to see so many friendly faces. And one of the other reasons why I wanted to take that selfie was not necessarily just because I wanted to show proof. My boss knows that I'm here, who is the deputy mayor of the city of Philadelphia in the Office of Public Engagement. But another reason is because social media, there's power in social media, right? So I'm going to tweet it out. I'm going to put it on Facebook. I'm going to put it on Instagram and that sort of thing. And let me tell you why. I told folks, in my friend circles that, I'm coming to Charlottesville, Virginia, to speak, to be on a panel. And they're like, what? Are you okay? Don't go there with your African hat on. Make sure you... I'm like, what? Are you serious? Right? So long story bearable, I don't have to get into semantics about sort of the power, right, of media. Okay, because some folks thought that I had to, bring protection to be here. This has been a very welcoming place for the hours, less than 24 hours that I've been here. So I just want to thank you all for that. I'm new to government, to city government in the city of Philadelphia. City of Philadelphia is comprised of about 1.6 million folks, in which half of the population identifies as African American. It's the city of brotherly love. And I like to call it and sisterly action and affection. Some people say sisterly affection, but sisterly action because it's the women who are really doing the work. So I'm sure that that's similar here. So give yourselves another. I like rounds of applause, right? Pats on the back. So once again, new to city government. My background, as was mentioned, is in education as well as mental health. So I'm pretty much a grassrootsy sort of type of person who likes to get their hands a little dirty in the field, if you will, working with populations that are underserved, underprivileged. Before I came to city government, I was working with a program that wrapped around black men in higher education to see that they successfully matriculate and graduate from that institution, and then also working with foster care youth. So I'm an advocate for the underdog, if you will. I'd like to just kind of give you a framework in terms of how my office, the mayor's office of Black Male Engagement works, and just sort of how we came about. Because first off, when folks hear that I'm with the mayor's office, that's one thing, and then you hear that I'm with Black Male Engagement, right? And I like to say it slow because when folks introduce, I'm like, it's the Office of Black Male Engagement, and some folks think I work for the FBI. It's not blackmail, right? So perhaps there might need to be a name change of sorts, but the idea is that we're working with a population of melanin-enriched men, whether they're black, brown, from mahogany to chestnut, right? You like melanin-enriched? It's all inclusive there, right? And the idea is that because there's such a large contingent in the city of Philadelphia, and there's some things that are problematic nationally, globally, right? But specifically in the city that impact, one's educational sort of trajectory, one's career trajectory, et cetera, so on and so forth, there was an intentional office created in 2014. Now, the idea went back, but under the Michael Nutter administration, he brought the office into fruition, and it was solely meant to manage a commission on African-American males, which was also under his administration, but previously mentioned, years before. We have a great new progressive mayor. His name is Mayor Jim Kenney. And he decided to expand the office and expand some of the permanency in the office. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about politics, but the idea in terms of the structure is that he created a division called the Office of Public Engagement, similar to the government's Office of Public Engagement, where we look to provide an infrastructure of trust for a community and its government. Therefore, we're looking for civic engagement opportunities. We're looking to create opportunities where a community can actually actively be engaged in the inner workings of government, because it is its government. Under that office, we have the Office of Women's Engagement, we have the Office of Youth Engagement, and we have the Office of Black Male Engagement, where we sort of oversee three umbrellas. The first is a now permanent Commission on African American Males, which is comprised of 30 men who represent various, facets of life. Some are community activists. We have a couple of attorneys. We have some doctors, medical doctors, doctors in education, and those sorts of things. Some folks who are politically astute. We have youth. And that's one thing that we were looking to do, was create more of an intergenerational commission, advisory commission for some of the things that we find near and dear in the office. And the office is really framed around 4 themes. One being education as its first, looking at justice, whether it's social justice, issues, or criminal justice issues. Also looking at health and wellness and some of the things that impact Black men and men of color in the health and wellness spaces, whether it's physical health, whether it's mental health, and also in economic development. We know that a large contingent of folks who do not work or who are not a part of the working class don't necessarily have or don't necessarily have a sustainable wage become a part of your population of need, if you will. So that's one section of the office, and that commission has been in existence, and like I said, now it's a permanent commission. We also oversee the My Brother's Keeper program. Anybody heard of My Brother's Keeper, MBK? Okay, so some of us are either a part of MBK communities affiliated with MBK. Under President Obama's administration, over 250 cities accepted the MBK Challenge, if you will. And the MBK Challenge revolved around milestones that really kind of revolve around cradle through college through career initiatives. The first 4 milestones wrap around in sort of education. And then we're also looking at post-secondary opportunities, looking at seeing that youth are employed in the city, and seeing finally that they're safe and that they get a second chance if they've been through some of our systems of adjudication. The MBK initiative was accepted in 2014, and since I only came on board as of last year, last March, actually, in looking at that particular initiative, we said, okay, well, what are we going to do when President Obama is not in office? And clearly we, had to strategize around that. One of the fortunate things about the city of Philadelphia is that under each milestone, whether it's the milestone to prepare youth for school, whether it's the milestone to see that they read at grade level, whether it's the milestone to see that youth graduate from high school, et cetera. One of the fortunate things about the city is that we already had organizations that were doing the work around each of these milestones. So what we decided to do under a collective impact strategy was to create milestone leaders for each of these milestones. Now, great, the program looked great on paper, but I said, okay, well, does the community know about it? How do you become a member? You know, what are folks doing that is really sort of changing the narrative? And this is sort of the adages that go along with this type of work, changing the narrative and sort of transforming what, or the impact on black men or melanin-rich men in the city. So what we wanted to, or what we're looking to do, and that we've done since January of this year, is created some more outwardly facing, community-oriented sort of dialogues, as well as a compendium of resources for communities. Since we are not, and as stated, my background is service-oriented, we are more of a policy-oriented office, but we convene organizations that deal with men and boys of color in the city. One of the things that we're proud about is our community conversation series, and actually, Sharif has spoken on our panels before for the community conversations, and again, each of the conversations are wrapped around those particular areas of need, education, et cetera, et cetera. The way that the conversations look is that we, in the very beginning, we have resources that we bring to the table, and they are actually creating dialogue with folks who are from the communities, who are interested in the particular areas and who have something to give to community. We host a panel discussion, and we always include a youth voice. We include a voice of experts who are doing work around that theme in the city, and a city representative who is doing work around the theme as well. After we go through dialogue from the panel's perspective, we turn and shift the conversation and make it specifically about community. So what we do is something that we call a mock needs assessment with community. We always see in each conversation we have between 40 and 100 participants. So it's a smaller crowd, but it's effective in terms of what we're doing, in terms of the work providing resources and really educating a cadre of people who are not necessarily represented in some of the inner workings of government. But we shifted to community. And what happens with that is if it's a larger crowd, we'll split the crowd up into groups of maybe 10, 15, so that they can have dialogue around 3 specific areas. One is needs. So we asked community specifically, based on the conversation that we're having and that we've had, what are your needs? What are your needs around the issue? Okay, thank you. What are your needs? And then we also asked them about resources that have been helpful to them within their communities, that they, all around the city of Philadelphia. And then finally, we asked them about their stated solutions that come from them around issues or around problems or challenges based on the theme. At the end, we take and collect all of that qualitative information with the assistance of the students at the Community College of Philadelphia, because this is the way we involve youth, and we create a monthly report that is used in some of the policy work that we do. So if we're partnering with the mayor himself, if we're partnering with city council and members of council and some of their legislative agendas and their agendas from their particular silo, if we're partnered with large organizations that are able to take a deep dive in our demographic, we also have the voice of the community in terms of their wants and needs with us. Another example of the initiative that, or one of the initiatives that we're proud of is what we worked closely with the health department and with our Office of Diversity and Inclusion to see that youth in a particular section in the city of Philadelphia called the Strawberry Mansion section designed, or we helped them to design a campaign around anti-smoking. The youth came up with various strategies in terms of how they would communicate with the community, with the Strawberry Mansion community. We taught them how to design surveys. We taught them how to collect and code data. And at the end, created a product where they finally put on a presentation, receive pay for all the work that they did in the community. And we also brought on a youth facilitator to work with these youth. But those are some of the ways that we received a grant from from the Department of Equity and Inclusion. And That grant was about $75, so we actually saw that the youth took advantage of that opportunity and were paid for their services. The things that they came up with, and I can send it at some point, but the PowerPoint presentation is available for your review if you'd like to see it. It looks like I'm running out of time, so I just want to thank you all.
So we'll have a few minutes at the end to have Q&A with our panelists, but we don't want to miss the voice of Aidyn and Ken, who are going to talk about their perspectives locally and how they work systemically.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm from the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation, and I will just share with you just a little bit about what we do at the foundation, and then I'm excited to share with you all a little bit about this program that we've just started this year. And I have to say I'm very grateful to have come to this conference because I've been hearing all kinds of great themes and principles, on some of which I've based this new program off of. And so it's encouraging to hear I'm on the right track, because this is a new field for me. I also run another program that's focused on the next generation, so people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so I'm more familiar with the research and the discourse in that area. And youth, that younger demographic is slightly new for me. So it's encouraging to hear all of the great work that you're all doing, and to see that we're on the right track. So the mission of the Community Foundation is to drive positive change in the community. And we do that in a number of ways, one of which we support donors who want to give charitably to the foundation and support local causes. We've given out several grants in the form of, we have donor advised funds, so that's one way that our donors are able to support local causes, and we've given out grants that way. We've given out grants through scholarships. We have several donors who want to support local students and encourage their development through various kinds of scholarships. But I think what we're most known for is our grants that support local nonprofits. So we do work in the city of Charlottesville and 7 surrounding counties. As you could see, in 2016, we gave out approximately $16 million through about 1,600 grants. And so we support issues in a number of areas, but the key issues that we have identified in the last couple of years where large amounts of funding have gone towards include workforce development, community health, and public housing. So we have a few different grant tracks. We offer funding for smaller programs, but we also offer funding for systemic approaches to some of these issues. And these 3 areas are the issues that initiatives or organizations have come together to address on a systemic level. So that's just a little bit about the Community Foundation. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards if you're all curious to learn more. But what I want to share with you all, especially I'd be curious to get feedback and any suggestions afterwards, because as I said, this is a new program this year. We've had a program over the last 20 years that have engaged high school youth. And in that program, we were teaching them traditional skills of grant making. So students came together, they would review proposals from local nonprofits, and they would choose one nonprofit to which they would give $10,000. When I joined the foundation, I thought, well, maybe it could use some revamping. Maybe high school youth won't necessarily be in a position anytime soon to have to make a decision about to whom they would give $10,000. So we started with this new program. It's called the Youth Design Program. It's similar in structure in that one high school student from each of the area high schools, so we have a committee of 10 students who are participating, and they receive proposals from local nonprofits who are proposing different projects that they would like high school students' input on. So how they could together collaboratively address some of the challenges in our community. So the challenge that their specific nonprofit works on. So these high school youth, they review the proposals. They discuss the issues that are addressed in these proposals, and then they select one nonprofit that they want to work with. So again, with this nonprofit, they have the opportunity to offer their suggestions and participate in a collaborative design process to how to address that specific challenge that that nonprofit raised. And along with the input of these 10 excellent high school students, the nonprofit also gets $10,000 to help develop that project and implement it. So the process is about 7 months long. The students start in September, and then they work through April. So you might be able to guess what some of the goals are for the students through a program like this. Again, a lot of that has already been articulated over the last couple of days. First and foremost, we'd like for the high school students to be able to contextualize a lot of their learnings to help them really understand what's going on in their community, so some of these issues that our community faces. And this year in particular, I wanted to put more emphasis on the question of diversity, equity, inclusion. And part of that is because of recent events. But also, I think that a lot of these issues are not homogeneous in nature. A lot of them are complex and inherently deal with questions of race and marginalization and exclusion. And so to really offer high school students the opportunity to become familiar with these ideas and to really grapple with them when it comes to real local challenges. So this year we've asked the local nonprofits in their proposals to speak specifically to how the challenges that they're trying to address, or how their approaches to these challenges, how they take into account the question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also, again, just giving high school students the opportunity to develop skills like critical thinking, problem solving, using their creativity, and having the opportunity to really develop their empathy. I think trying to see things from the perspectives of some of these underprivileged or marginalized communities that nonprofits work with, and trying to think about, okay, what are some of the needs of these groups, and what can we do, what can we propose that might help resolve some of the challenges that they're facing. And just for the community, I think it's a great opportunity to start to work together, to form these partnerships in addressing some of these complex problems. Because they're complex problems, they require complex approaches. So to be able to work with high schools and support them in their mission in the development of high school youth, and to work with nonprofits and offer them an opportunity to listen to and include the youth voice. I think being able to work together to approach, again, some of these complex problems for me, it's a natural approach to really trying to get to the bottom of these problems and offer a sustainable approach to these challenges. And lastly, I wanted to include on there, to me, this program is an opportunity to offer more imagination, to be able to inject a more imaginative, creative approach to some of these organizational structures in terms of their processes for how they do things, how they respond to some of the challenges we face. And I think, who better then to lead us in that than some of our youth? I think they bring with them this capacity to think beyond some of our conventional ways of doing things, and they're not restricted necessarily by standard outcomes or expectations to fit within measurable outcomes. They're we're encouraging them to use that imaginative capacity and to encourage nonprofits to also think in that way, to think big and to think about, well, how can we creatively respond to some of these challenges that we haven't thought about? What are some perspectives or angles that we haven't considered before? And I'm gonna let Kian here, who's one of our students on the committee, speak to his experiences so far. We've only met for a couple of months, but I think he's a sharp student, and I think he'll have some interesting things to say. But before I invite him up, I just wanted to leave these quotes in the background for you all to take your time reading. The first one is by one of my favorite philosophers, Deleuze, and really try to share this idea that as a community, as a society, it would be wonderful to see if we can shift towards more emphasis on possibilities rather than what is the reality. There's an understanding and an acceptance of what the reality is, but I think it would be wonderful if we spend more time imagining the world that we want to live in and the possibilities and some of the approaches we can take in creating that world that we want. So now I will let Kian share some of his experiences.
Hi. As already mentioned, I represent Murray High School in the Youth Design Committee. We only had our second meeting a few days ago. I think it was earlier this week. So we haven't had the opportunity to do all that much, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but it's been a really good time so far. It's been really interesting meeting the representatives of the other schools around Albemarle County and Charlottesville. Everyone on the committee is really smart and having a really good time kind of talking about the issues that we proposed and coming up with solutions to fix them. We recently got the proposals and we're reading over them, kind of assessing the proposals and the issues that are in the community today. And one of the main ideas that seems to, come around a lot from the nonprofit organizations is like the idea of diversity and making sure that everyone is involved in the community, making sure that even if you are in a low-income household or don't have the best transportation or the best funds, or if you have some troubles getting things, you're still able to get to the arts or to school or whatever you need to do, making sure that everything is diverse and that low-income households can do what they need to and what they want to. Especially after the violence of August 12th, a lot of the proposals, if not all of them, did mention that. We have a really good community here in town, and everyone just kind of wants to heal after that tragedy. Everyone, the people who are here really hurt from that experience and really want to overcome it and kind of embrace the diversity of Charlottesville and make sure everyone feels loved and accepted in the community. And that's definitely the main issue that we've been dealing with in the committee. We do have different proposals, different ideas, but that's a big one. Definitely something we focus on a lot. And all the ideas from the people around the committee have been great, just kind of talking about how we can include more diversity, especially after that event. It was a hard thing to get over. Not something that you would expect in a town like this. The people of the town are really great and are in no way like what happened there. So it was a really big surprise. So definitely something that we all have to build off of and make sure that everyone feels included, and then that is not how our town is represented, because we definitely don't want that to be the image of Charlottesville, since it's a really inclusive and diverse town. So that is one of the main issues we work with. I'm excited for the committee going on, because after reviewing all the proposals, they definitely want a lot of input from us. I kind of expected more just them wanting advice and the money, but in reality, they really do want us to fix the problems they're proposing. They pretty much give us the issue and put it in our hands with a little bit of advice. Not that they don't want the money, but they want our advice as well, which is nice. They want the voice of the youth to help them and see how to get over their problems opposed to just fixing it themselves, which I think is a really good idea. And I think the committee in general was a really good idea, trying to involve the youth in fixing these issues and helping nonprofits, which we have a lot of here in Charlottesville. We have a lot of nonprofits in Charlottesville, which is a great thing. Definitely something that's really good for the community. I don't remember what the number was, but it was really high. 1,200? Yeah. Wow. We have 1,200 nonprofits in Charlottesville. So that's a pretty high number. Not that all of them have given a proposal to us, but the ones that have definitely are interested in the advice and problem-solving capabilities of the high schoolers around here. And I think we're going to be able to do a good job for them. We do have quite a few meetings coming up, so we're not that finished or have anything decided, but just kind of talking about the different opportunities that we have and different opportunities we can take and different solutions for problems, and how we can just kind of come together more as a community and get over the events that happened and just kind of embrace the diversity of Charlottesville and make sure everyone's included and just kind of keep going forward, which I think is a really important thing to do, and we all do on the committee. And just the people on the committee itself that have been great. Everyone that represents their school do a really great job, and I think the schools here in Charlottesville and Albemarle County are just great. The people who run them and the administration make sure that the students get what they need to know, and yeah, I think that was the time. I have 10 minutes? I thought I was just taking the last 5 minutes of hers. I'm not sure I have 10 minutes worth of stuff to say.
We can open up to question and answers if you're finished.
I think I'm going to do that because I've pretty much gone over anything. I thought it was just thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists, and our goal in putting this panel together is to begin to think about how structures are in place, more formal structures help to increase and provide a space for young people to be a part of universal solutions, from a national approach down to an organizational approach, a fund-making organizational approach, and what it looks like to partner with the community, the types of collaborations that are required, as well as the funding that goes along with these processes and experiences for young people. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Any questions for our panelists? Sure. Do we have a mic? Mic's coming. Mic's coming. Thank you.
This is selfishly trying to ask you a question about moving forward in Charlottesville, because I can't stay for the workshop this afternoon. So I might be jumping the gun, but I'm really interested in hearing from folks here so this really important discussion was brought up by young people in Charlottesville about the predominance of Confederate imagery and the ways in which structural racism is reflected in the physical environment here. We certainly have that in Philadelphia too, I'm not gonna lie, But when you talk about moving forward, I'd love to hear, what are these organizations, how are they thinking about addressing that issue that was so bravely brought up by activists here as a way to move forward and embrace diversity, or is that being addressed, I guess? I don't know 100% if this is a question that you can answer, so I apologize if it's not.
Well, I'm happy to speak from the perspective of the foundation. So we have what's called the Heal Charlottesville Fund. I don't know if some of you have heard about that, but so many different groups have been coming together and putting some, contributing towards that fund. And we've been using that money first and foremost to support direct intervention, so offering or paying for the expenses that are required for trauma-related care in response to August 11th and 12th. So we've been funding Common Ground, for example, which is a local nonprofit that offers mental health care support. We've also paid for medical expenses. So a lot of that more immediate assistance, again, speaking from the perspective of the Community Foundation, We're also in the process of developing a long-term plan for how do we respond in a systemic way to questions of discrimination and institutional racism. So a lot of that funding will be granted out to organizations, initiatives that want to address that in their own respective ways. So in terms of funding support, that's how we're responding to that. I know that there have been a lot of local efforts, smaller projects, bubbling about trying to respond in their best ways to what happened. And I've been fortunate to have been able to be a part of a lot of those conversations, and it's wonderful. I mean, ranging from how do we respond artistically, so this question of our public monuments or public spaces, how they're being used and the symbolic representation there. So in kind, there are groups that are trying to think through, well, what can we do artistically to respond in a more positive or more affirmative way that's more representative of a voice of inclusivity. So for example, there's conversations about putting up a mural on 4th Street where that tragedy happened. There are groups that are talking about their own public art forms that they could put out there. The technology sector, which is a group of next-gen individuals, very talented, very eager and passionate, they want to be able to use their skill sets. So the other program that I mentioned that I also manage, it's also new this year, it's called the Imagination Foundation, and it's trying to leverage the talents and the skills that individuals in our community have to offer. So a lot of people, they come to me almost every day saying, I want to help, I want to do something. But as a foundation, we want to guide their doing and their helping in a way that's thoughtful and that's not just necessarily reinforcing some of these unequal power dynamics that have caused a lot of these problems. So again, from the perspective of the foundation, that's how we're trying to respond.
Thanks, Aidyn. Other questions? Back here in the corner, do we have a mic? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Okay, so I live in Charlottesville, and first, before I ask my question, I just wanted to insert that we should be really careful to remember that, like, August 12th is still happening. Like, it's still going on. It's an ongoing battle, and also, like, August 12th wasn't an isolated event. Like, we deal with white supremacy in Charlottesville every day in many forms. But my question is, how are we making, like, how is your foundation making sure that you're giving the money to people who have been doing the work way before August 12th and not just these people or, like, organizations that are, like, coming up to, like, come up with new responses that are kind of duplicates of things that already exist? And then also, how are you, like, making sure that you don't contribute to surface level solutions that just won't actually make a change, but just like something that looks good, like for branding of the city or something like that?
That's a great question. So fortunately, as a community foundation, it's nice that we have a helicopter view of what's going on in the community. Again, you know, with approximately 1,200 nonprofits in the area and many of those applying to us for funding, we get a sense for what are the issues, what matters to the community, what are the needs, what are the challenges. And so we have, like I mentioned, we have three different grant tracks. One is we provide funding for smaller programs. But then we also have, on the other end, we have funding support for initiatives that address problems on a more systemic level. So we make those decisions based on, okay, this is how groups are coming together, this is how they're thinking through the problem in a more holistic way, and this is their response, their nuanced response to the problem. And so we have both we offer funding for specific smaller interventions, and then on a programmatic level, and also on a systemic level, for example, workforce development. How are organizations and groups working together to address workforce development in our community? And community health is another area. So having that awareness of who the different actors are, who the different organizations are, what are the important issues at this moment in time, we can make funding decisions based on that knowledge. Also, I'm trying to remember, you asked some really great questions. I think you talk a little bit about making sure that there isn't overlap, or that And that's a challenge because we're such an enthusiastic community. We're coming up with ideas and initiatives almost every day, and so communication is really important. So as I mentioned earlier, I think, for me, I think it's really important that we try to cultivate that collaborative approach to addressing problems. So for me, I see this youth program as one way to do that. It's working with high schools, it's supporting them, it's supporting businesses and nonprofits. It's really trying to come together and think through these problems as partners. And it's still a challenge, I think, because so many new ideas pop up every day. It's hard to keep track of them all. But and the other program that I mentioned, the Imagination Foundation, it's trying to help individuals understand what opportunities are out there. So we connect the energy and the talents and the enthusiasm to the efforts that are out there. We say, okay, these are the organizations that are working on the issues, and these are the opportunities. They have needs for this kind of support, and so we facilitate those connections. Did I answer that?
Thank you. Other questions?
I want to follow up on what the.
So we'll go with Rod, and then we'll go to Beck. I'm sorry.
You've pointed me?
I'm not sure who I pointed at, but we're going to go with you for now, and then we're going to
Oh,
go to
it's okay. I don't want to, cut the line. Follow up on the question before, and this is not an easy question for you, but since you're a convenient target, I'll ask. We've been working on a project of community organizing, and we work with this organization called the Funding Collaborative for Youth Organizing. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that promotes, it tries to get foundations to fund youth development to also fund youth organizing and make a case that it contributes to youth development. One of my concerns, so I want you to lay my concerns and say I really don't have to worry about this. One of my concerns is sort of similar to what you said, is that if we're successful in getting foundations to see youth community organizing as something to fund, that the organizations, the big organizations with, have grant writers on their staff who are making $50,000, $60,000 a year, will write you this wonderful proposal. Me too, we can do the organizing, fund us. And they've never done any before, but they really make a convincing thing. And then someone who's been working out there for years, because they don't have the capacity in the eyes of the foundation, really can't compete. I mean, I know you'd have to make a decision about, well, if they've been doing it a long time, but we don't think they have the capacity, we'd have to give them some TA, et cetera, et cetera. But just how do you work with those issues, the really polished foundations that already have a lot of money and the ones that have been laboring for years on issues?
So the wonderful thing about our community foundation is that since we've started this new strategy where we have these three different grant tracks, when organizations submit proposals to us, we have a conversation with them. So it's not, here's the deadline, you submit your proposal, and then that's it. That's not the end of our communication. There's a lot of back and forth. So organizations that don't necessarily have the resources to put together a stellar application won't necessarily be at a disadvantage, because they will submit what's called a concept note. They can submit their ideas for how they would like to use the funding, and then they can ask specific questions, and we can respond to that concept note and say, well, maybe you might want to mention this, or maybe this would make for a stronger project. So it's a conversation. We like to look at these organizations as partners. Also, I'm on the other side of the foundation, so I don't make the decisions about, for all of you who might come up to me and ask for money afterwards, I don't make decisions about the grants, but what I do know is that we have committees that make these decisions, and they're very thoughtful committees, and they have rigorous questions that they ask themselves for what a sustainable project might be, what an effective use of funding might look like. So I know they do go through a laborious process when they make these decisions.
I was going to say, and quite often it's not always about money either. I know, alluding to the monument sort of comment that came up, one of the statues that is erected in the City Hall space in the city of Philadelphia is the former mayor, former police Commissioner Frank Rizzo statue. Now, this statue, for many groups, melanin-enriched groups, if you will, may be seen as a symbol of racist ideology, if you will. An example of that is that Sharif alluded to some of the protests that students have had, in the city of Philadelphia. Well, one such protest, a big protest around changing the curriculum for African-American youth in the city. As a leader in the city, this man, if you allow me to call him that, took and the police force harmed many of the youth that were actively involved in that protest and stripped them till they were naked in the streets, sprayed them, locked them up, and that sort of thing. So those are the types of, egregious activities that took place during his reign of leadership. And it's erected in the city of Philadelphia. But the reason why I say it's not always about funding is because quite often, folks don't know that they're paying for these monuments to be sustained and erected in the city of Philadelphia, right? As taxpayers, they are paying for it. So what you could do is mobilize and convene community groups to say, listen, we're not having it. This is something that we will not, stand for. We don't want, right? So in our series of community conversations, not that only happen on the community level, but in some of our political spaces, et cetera, we're talking about these sorts of things and making sure that community voice is heard, and hoping that legislators and folks who are in charge of making decisions around maintaining those types of monuments will listen and take it down. And I think that that monument, as well as some of the other monuments that have been alluded to, the buzz is getting around the city. Another such thing that we're doing, one of the lead organizations in the city, the Mural Arts Foundation, has something called a monument lab that is taking place all around the city. Many labs, many monuments are being erected, and next to that egregious symbolic statue that was mentioned, there's a pick. How many people know what a pick is? Like, you pick your hair, right? So some of the traditional picks in the melanin-enriched communities had it was a black pick with the symbol of a fist and the metal, pick, a pick, right? So we have a monument of the pick that is within 100 feet of that statue, just to let, folks know that's not necessarily what it was created for, but it's also a symbolic representation to say, listen, folks are not having it. As we're building solidarity around and becoming more educated about these issues that keep people oppressed, keep young people oppressed, the youth are really rising around those types of issues. So it's not always about money. That was my point.
It costs money to fund that organizing.
It costs money to fund what organizing?
All that the youth organizing, the work around it costs money.
Oh yeah. So what I'm saying is that my office, which doesn't have any money, by the way, I'm just letting you know. So we're representatives of the mayor's office, and but my office, which organizes youth, we work closely with the Office of Youth Engagement, right? Who also doesn't have much money. We convene these youth spaces, right? So this is the way that we use collaborative impact with some of the organizations that either are already doing some of the work, or organizations that we'd like to, or just sort of organize youth groups that we bring about, and that's not costing any money. So
We have a few more after here. We'll go over to the right, Mike.
So hi everyone, my name is Carrie, and Boston has the highest wealth gap in the whole entire country. And with that being said, our city is very segregated, or when you go to a lot of other states, it's very segregated. When I used to live in the suburbs, I had my best friend was white, and people would look at her funny because she's like, you have a black best friend, and she kind of would like stand up for me a lot of the times when I was silent. So, and then yesterday when we went to Charlottesville downtown, we were talking with this dude at the chocolate shop. I don't know the name of it, but their chocolate's bomb. And he was talking about how he used to run a nonprofit dealing with, youth development and social civic engagement. And he was talking about how he integrated, like he brought the segregated demographics of the city together. So he brought like youth of color and youth of who usually were high income, which he said were white, and brought them both into the room, and they both dealt with the issues together. And I felt like that kind of brought a sense of core of humanity into the room, and a lot of times when we think about the youth, well, especially when it comes to these issues, because the youth of color are affected a lot on a systemic level, we also have to think about it starts when you're young. And when a lot of the youth that, when they go home who have like high income families, the type of conversations that are being had at the table behind closed doors. And then they come to school and they say like biased things, and it's because they were taught it. So I'm wondering, like, what is your approach on how to integrate and bring all youth into the conversation, because they do have a power dynamic of just having white privilege as it is, and how to utilize that in a way to humanize each other, find this base of humanization, and fight together.
I was going to say the irony. The irony for me in that statement is you talked about, sort of Boston, right? And that's my answer, or sort of the overarching answer for me would be education, right? Because a lot of things happen through education. But speaking about Boston in particular, we're talking about the history of our first public institution, right? Boston Latin School, 1635 or whatever it was, in that 17th century. So, that's the irony in that statement. You have the progenitor of public education in these states united in a place that has the lowest, right? And the answer is education. So, maybe I'm going all the way around the corner just to get up the street, but the idea is that, I think that we should look at some of the cultural components in the work that we do, whether it's, from an organizational standpoint, governmental standpoint. And what I mean by cultural components, when I speak about culture, I'm thinking about at least 5 things to kind of look at. Look at language, right? So as we're doing the work actively with youth, there is no decision about me without me, clearly. And that's been an adage for many youth groups, right? So look at language and understanding the nuances of language. If you can't speak the language of the people that you are representing, then it becomes sort of this dichotomy in communication. So language is important. Also look at ritual religion, right? So some folks have, ritualistic practices or traditional practices that take place. Those practices might not necessarily be applicable for today's youth. Many of the things, since Boston has, like I said, been the progenitor of public education, many of the things that were practiced historically in education are still being practiced, and many of the groups that have been oppressed traditionally are still being oppressed. So we need to have a new thought process in terms of ritual religion, not only in our locales, local areas, but also around the nation, in the world, if you will. Also looking at aesthetic. And I know that it was mentioned in terms of, does that mean shut up with it? Oh, okay, aesthetic, right? So, and just sort of the things that have to do with the way that we adorn ourselves, the way that we look, the way that we react to, the way that we look at people and we look at ourselves, some of the monuments, et cetera, right? Aesthetically, what is pleasing, and what are some things that are representative of some things that aren't pleasing to us, right? Looking at the arts. The arts plays a huge role in terms of how many of the youth that I've worked with traditionally and many of the youth that we work with today engage various spaces, right? So whether it's visual art, music, dance, all sorts of arts. And then finally for me is looking at food, right? Food. And food is a big part of my life. I don't know about, right? But the things that we eat, the things that we remain or keep ourselves healthy with, I think that the food that we eat plays a big part, and it's correlated to many of the behaviors that impact our youth and impact our society. And I don't think folks really kind of, play a heavy role in terms of understanding those types of cultural components in doing the work that we do. So I think that that's where we start, just to answer your question.
Lisa, can I ask you to talk about some of the strategies that 4-H attempts to do to think about bringing those different suburban, urban, rural youth together around this conversation?
Yeah, Carrie, I think it's such a great question, and it is something working at a state level. We have 4-H happening around the state. We have a lot of diversity in Illinois. We have Chicago. We're the 5th largest Latino population in the country, and that's largely in our rural communities, not in Chicago. And so, we have a huge Congolese community, the largest Polish-speaking community outside Poland. I mean, we just, in 4-H and all those places, it's important to me that really have the space and the local adults to make that a community-centered, culturally relevant, engaging space for whoever those youth are. But one example for me is in Springfield. One of our 4-H staff grew up in Springfield. She's African American, attends an AME church, very, very involved, went to an HBCU. She was raised in the Urban League. She knows that community and is a mentor. She is amazing. She lights up those kids in Springfield. And I'm always talking with her, how can we take your kids and bring them to a space with kids from other parts of Illinois? And we're doing the hard work and we don't have it figured out. But how to talk about really hard topics and model civil discourse in a way that none of the adults in this country have figured out. So how do we listen to the youth and give them a safe space in which to really try to do that work? It is something that we have the opportunity to do in 4-H because we are in each of those communities and again can kind of create those intentional platforms. It doesn't always work out, but in that a state level youth leadership team, one of Miss Erica's students who's on that youth leadership team for years and years and years was all white. And I went to go visit with them, and we've intentionally done things to make that different. But then as soon as you create a space for, it's a process. I don't know who said it yesterday, woke is a process. It's like, you don't just say, oh, let's get a diverse group of kids, whether it's suburban, urban, that Carrie was talking about, bring them together in a space, but then you got to do the hard work. Now that we're in the same space, what do we do with that? And again, we don't have it figured out, but I am pretty convinced that making those spaces is the critical first step, and then turning it over to the youth, because I think they'll figure it out better than we have.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you as an audience. We do want to have a call to action, which has been customary for our conference, and just want to end on the note of creating those safe spaces, whether they're virtual or physical, to do the hard work and to collaborate with young people and the people like you who are in this room. So we're going to thank you very, very much for working with us today and being with us yesterday as well. Thank you.